Today, I'm testing the driving assistance here in the Puma Gen-E. I've also made another video where I reviewed the whole car, especially the built-in software. And if you haven't seen it yet, there's a link in the description or up in the top right corner right now. At the end of this video, I'll give my overall assessment of the car, so watch until the end so you don't miss it. But before we drive, I usually turn off the driver monitoring and speed warning so they don't bother us along the way. But this car doesn't have driver monitoring. There's no little camera sitting there watching me, so I don't have to worry about that. And as for the speed warning, well, it's very easy to turn off. It's actually not that annoying, it just gives a little beep, and the car is generally quite good at knowing the correct speed limits. It's not perfect, but it's better than most. But if you want to turn it off, just hold this limit button on the steering wheel for a moment, and it'll say hold down to disable speed warning. Now the speed warning is off, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. That means if I forgot when I started and it begins to annoy me, I can just hold that down and then it's gone. But now we'd better get out on the road. So, I've made it onto the highway, and to activate the adaptive cruise control and lane assist, I really just have to press this button down here. That activates both, meaning both the auto steering and the adaptive cruise control. It sets the speed to what I'm currently driving, even though it knows I'm allowed to go 110. And unfortunately, there isn't a button I can press to quickly set the speed to the current limit. I can hold this up or tap it up as I usually do when I need to change the speed. But I don't have a button where I can just press, set it to 110, because I was only at 96. On the other hand, as soon as the car sees a speed sign by the road, well, then it changes the speed. But since there's still a bit of a way to that sign down there, I have to hold this up to get to 110 manually. Most cars that can adapt the speed themselves have an option to just press a button to set it to the speed limit instead of what the car just set it to, or what you set manually. So it's a bit of a shame you can't do that, but luckily it's relatively easy to increase the speed. And yes, as you've already guessed, it's this little thing I use here to turn the speed up and down. I thought at first that you had to press these buttons over here, but it's not a button. This is actually a little toggle you can flip up and down. So if I press it briefly, I change it by 1 km/h. And if I hold it down, I change it by 10 km/h. Much like what you know from most other cars. But you should be aware that this isn't just a button, it's actually also a toggle switch. So you can both press it to restore, so you can get back to the set speed if the assistance were turned off. Or you can press up and down on it to change the speed. To adjust the distance to the vehicle in front, I have a button up here I can press. And every time I press it, well, it changes the distance. And I can choose between 1, 2, 3 or 4 car lengths. By the way, if you don't like lane assist, but you still want adaptive cruise control, well, it's actually quite easy to turn off here in the Ford Puma Gen-E, because there's a button right down here that's used to deactivate lane assist. If I press it once, it pops up and asks, do you want to deactivate? Then press again, and now lane assist is turned off. So now the car only maintains distance and speed, but it no longer steers for me or monitors the lane markings. If I want to activate it again, well, I just have to press the button once, and we're back, so the lane keeping system is on again. So for those who don't like the car steering for them, it's very, very easy to turn off by just pressing this button down here twice. It's actually quite clever. The Puma Gen-E unfortunately doesn't have a touch sensor in the steering wheel, which means it uses the small motor it also uses to turn the wheel to see if I have my hand on it. And that means if I don't provide any resistance here, well, it'll pop up and complain and say I need to have my hands on the wheel, like it's doing now. Even if I have my hand on it, it'll still say that, and then it'll complain even more if I don't sort of nudge the steering wheel a little bit. I don't think the calibration is quite spot on. It's better than in some of the cars I've tried, but it's not as good as in the best ones. The best one I've tried to date is still the Xpeng G6, where I actually thought there was a touch sensor in the wheel because it was calibrated so finely that if I just had my hand on it, well, the car never complained. The Puma Gen-E does that every now and then. You need to have a little bit of resistance, but it's not quite as bad as the worst cars I've tried, where you really have to pull on it before it registers. But I still think it's a shame they didn't include a touch sensor, because there are plenty of other cars in this class that have touch sensors in the steering wheel, and it's just more comfortable because then you avoid these false alarms when you still have your hand on it and the car just can't tell. If the adaptive cruise control and lane assist have been deactivated, for example if I step on the brake, that deactivates all the assistance systems. Well, then I can reactivate them again by pressing the restore button here. And that activates both the adaptive cruise control to the last set speed, which I can see down here, and it activates lane assist. So a single press and I'm back again. That's also fine. I also always test overtaking with adaptive cruise control. That is, when I'm behind a slow-moving car and want to overtake with the adaptive cruise control set. How does the car react there? How quickly does it pick up speed? When does it start to accelerate? Because some cars, they don't accelerate right away, and then I can't always manage to get up to speed out in the overtaking lane, which results in me being caught by those cars coming from behind. But let's try to see how the Puma handles this. You can follow along over here on the power meter to see how much the car is stepping on the accelerator. Now I activate the turn signal and start to pull out, and it gave just a little push on the accelerator, but then it sort of let go again. And then it's only when I get out here that it starts to accelerate. And that's just a bit annoying, because it means I don't really manage to get up to speed. I mean, it gives a little, yeah, I can see you want to overtake, but because I'm not clear of the car in front, well, it simply waits to accelerate until I've pulled out into the overtaking lane. And that means that if someone comes up behind me at high speed, well, they'll manage to catch up to me. So it's not quite as good as it could be. Better systems start accelerating immediately, and they don't let up unless I get right on the tail of the other car. But I didn't do that here. As you can see, the Puma Gen-E unfortunately overtakes on the inside when you're using adaptive cruise control. The best systems keep an eye out for a slow-moving car in the outer lane and stay behind it as required by traffic rules, but the Puma Gen-E doesn't do that. We should also see what happens if I'm in the passing lane and have to pull in behind a slow car in the inner lane while using adaptive cruise control. Is the car good at reducing speed and braking without going crazy with collision warnings and so on, or what? Let's take a look. Well, it brakes nicely here without any issues, even down to 80 kilometers per hour from 110 without any warnings. Even though I was relatively close, it managed to brake in time, so that's approved. This car also has blind spot assist, and there's a small indicator in the side mirror that lights up when there's a car in my blind spot, as you can see right now. Nothing lights up on the display, it's just in the side mirrors. I also always test how good the car is at re-registering the lane when I change lanes. This car doesn't have automatic lane change, so I do it manually, which makes it easy to test. And what I do is activate the turn signal, which deactivates the lane assist. And once I'm in the new lane and positioned nicely in the middle, I deactivate the turn signal. And there, it found it. It wasn't super good at that, it actually took quite a while. But I've also noticed that when using Comfort Blink, where you just tap the turn signal stalk instead of manually switching it on, cars are usually faster at registering the lane because they're constantly monitoring and ready to re-register it. So let's try that. I'll try pulling into the inner lane here first. I'll use the Comfort Blink. Now I'm in the lane and it found it. So that was much faster, as you can see. Let's try again. Moving to the outer lane, I'll use the Comfort Blink. Now I'm in the lane and it found it again, so that works well enough. So it's only when you do it manually, forcing it to turn off auto steering, and then it suddenly has to figure out how to steer again while I'm in the lane, that it's a bit slow. One thing I also always test is narrow and wide lanes. Wide lanes are typically found in Denmark at highway on-ramps, where the distance between the lines briefly increases. All the electric cars I've tested since my Fiat 500e could handle it, but it couldn't, so I always test it. But narrow lanes, that's typically something you see when there's road work. And if you've ever driven south through Germany, you've also experienced long stretches with extra narrow lanes. And there it's just super nice if the car can keep you centered in the lane. Now there's road work up here where the outer lane is at most 2 meters wide, and that's why I've positioned myself here. Right now we're doing 110. The car should see the sign, it did, and it's slowing down to 80, but just ahead the lane gets really narrow. So let's just see what the Puma does here. It has me in the lane now, but it cancelled the auto steering. And it also tells me there's roadwork, which is fine, I guess. If I just try to stay here in the lane and see if I can get it to catch the lane again. It's also extra narrow here, I'd say, but it simply can't handle it. It simply can't catch this narrow lane. So that's obviously a little bit of a shame. I will say this one is extra narrow. Here it looks like it gets a little bit wider, so let's see if that helps. No, it actually doesn't. It can't handle lanes that are narrower than normal. So that's a bit of a setback, because otherwise I think it's done quite well so far. Now we're coming to one of these highway on-ramps where the lines briefly get further apart. So let's also see how the Puma Gen-E handles that. Well, it handled that as expected without any problems, so that's fine. I expected that too. Now I've reached the country road, because this is where I usually test how good the car is at adapting speed to limits and also at lane keeping on roads that aren't quite as straight as highways. For example, up this hill where it can't see the lines very far ahead. And so far, well, it's going fine, and I'd say that's generally my experience with most new electric cars. This kind of country road with some hills, they can actually handle that. Just a bit further down here, this 60-kilometer limit ends that I'm driving in, which means I'll have a country road speed limit of 80 kilometers per hour. So let's see what the car does when I hit the sign that ends the 60 limit. I've now passed the sign and the car has registered the new speed and is accelerating up to 80 kilometers per hour. So it's exactly as it should be. Very, very good. In a moment, we'll reach a city zone where I'm only allowed to drive 50. So let's see if the car knows this in advance or if it only brakes when I enter the city zone. I can see down here on the display that it's showing a little 50-kilometer sign, and it's actually already started to reduce the speed, so that when I hit the city zone, as I'm doing now, well, then I'm actually driving right around 50. So again, super nice. It adapts itself to the road's layout. In advance, it knows the speed limits and adjusts to them so that it doesn't brake hard or take a long time to get down in speed once I've entered a new zone. Now we're coming to this stretch where the speed limit changes first from out of town and then to 60, 70 and 70 ends. This is the stretch of road where I usually test how the car reacts to these speed changes. So let's try and see how it goes here. Up here I'm leaving the city zone, but there's also a 60-kilometer sign. So let's just see what the car does. Well, it's seen the 60-kilometer sign and it's starting to increase the speed to 60, which we're driving at now. Really nice. Now we're approaching the 70-kilometer zone. Right up here, the car is still steering fine for me, and the sign is coming here. Now we've passed the sign, the speed is registered, and the car accelerates up to 70 kilometers per hour. And now the 70 kilometers per hour ends, so I naturally expect the car to automatically increase the speed to 80. Let's try and see. I've passed the sign, it's registered it, and it's accelerating nicely up to 80. That is completely, okay, top-notch. It's exactly as it should be. Down at the city sign earlier, we saw that the car adjusted the speed before I hit the city zone, meaning it slowed down in advance because it adapted to the road's layout. So a bit further ahead here, there's a roundabout coming up. So now it'll be interesting to see if it also does that at roundabouts or if it's only at speed limits. The car has already seen that I'm approaching a 50-kilometer zone. It shows it down here with a little grey 50-kilometer sign. And it's now reduced the speed. So we hit 50 when we drive into the zone here. And now the roundabout is coming down here. So let's try and see what happens. It shows at least that there's a turn here, and it actually reduces the speed further here in the turn. Now, it might not be perfectly timed because some cars are coming here, so I have to step on the brake manually. But actually, the car had slowed down to these 30 kilometers per hour on its own. So if the road had been clear, I could have basically just driven into the roundabout and continued around without using either accelerator or brake, because the car adjusts the speed itself and increases it again when I exit the roundabout. So that's also really nice. We also need to test what the assistance systems do if I don't react to warnings about having my hand on the wheel. If I, for example, had a medical emergency, I could have fallen asleep, but I could also have actually become ill, so that I can no longer drive the car or steer the car. So now I'm taking my hands off the wheel, and then we'll see what the car does when I don't react to warnings. It's coming up and beeping at me. I'm being naughty. I'm not doing anything. Then it says resume steering. It's turned off steering, I can see. Now it's giving a little tap on the brakes, which is actually fine. It's tapping on the brakes again, as if it's trying to wake me up. Now it's tapping on the brakes once more. It's still driving. Now it's turning on the hazard lights, and it's starting to slow down and bring the car to a stop. Now I'll just speed up again because there are some cars coming up behind me, so I don't block the road. But it's actually doing what it should. It looked as if it turned off the auto steering. It didn't have these blue lines on the side, but it actually stayed in the middle of the lane. And it also tried to give a few tugs with the brakes first to see if I'd just fallen asleep. Would I react to that? And when I didn't react to that, it turned on the hazard lights and then it started to slow down. And I'm pretty sure it would have brought the car to a complete stop if I hadn't intervened, because someone was coming from behind. So I have to say, it's approved, it's actually how it should be, like the best systems. There are some that simply just keep driving, and that's not very smart. But here, the car is trying to alert me that I need to do something, and if I don't react after repeated attempts, it brings the vehicle safely to a stop with hazard lights and everything. Way to go, Ford. That's exactly as it should be. I also usually drive down some smaller roads to see how lane assist, that is, the auto steering, handles lanes where there might not be markings on both sides. So let's just try that. So I've come down to a country road where I don't have markings on the shoulder. I just have a curb with some cobblestones. And so far, well, the car hasn't found the lane for me. It's looking down there. I can see there's a little white steering wheel down here. So when it lights up white, it's as if it can see there's something there. But it's not steering for me yet. Now I'll just try to keep it going for a bit here and see if it might catch it along the way. But so far, no dice. I have to say, most other cars I've tested have actually been able to find this. Now, it actually found it briefly too. I don't quite know why it couldn't before, but it cancels it again, as you can see, so you'd have to say it can't do it. So it can't figure it out when there's a curb on one side and only stripes in the median there. So yeah, it's not quite as good as the best systems. Now, none of them promise that they can steer here on these small winding roads. They're primarily intended for country roads, where it's straight, and then for highways. But I think it's a very good way to test how good the systems are at actually holding the lane if conditions aren't quite normal and aren't quite perfect. But let's see when we get to the last part of my test route. It's this little stretch where the limit is 40, but where the road winds quite a bit. On the other hand, there are stripes on both sides, so let's see how the Puma Gen-E handles that part, if it can find the lane when we get there. Yeah, so I've just driven through the final part of my lane assist test route, meaning this narrow winding road with clear markings on both sides, but where the road twists and the limit is 40. But here, the Puma Gen-E couldn't find the lane. It wasn't because the system doesn't work when you're only doing 40, because I actually tested it on a straight stretch of road, and there I activated adaptive cruise control and lane assist at 40 kilometers per hour, and it worked perfectly. But it just doesn't work here on this particular stretch of road. It simply cannot find the lane markings here. It found it briefly leading up to this tricky curve, then lost it again immediately. But for the rest of the trip, it just couldn't find it, so it clearly doesn't like this. On the other hand, it knows there's a roundabout ahead, and now you can see it's slowing down to 30 kilometers per hour, so I can enter the roundabout nice and easy. I'm not touching the accelerator or the brake right now. And then I exit the roundabout again, and, well, then it speeds up all by itself without me having to do a thing. So it's actually very, very good at that part. It also caught that 40-kilometer sign there, so it sets the speed limit correctly too. So yeah, as I said before, it's not like these cars promise full self-driving, but it does surprise me a bit that it couldn't steer back there, because generally, my impression of the lane assist on this car is that it's actually quite good at staying in the lane on country roads or highways, even with some curves. Maybe it's because that specific road is registered as being too narrow, so the system won't even activate there. I honestly don't know, because as I said, it worked on the straight country road at 40 kilometers per hour. But, well, your mileage may vary. This is also just a fun little test to see how well the systems can stay in the lane under slightly more extreme conditions. I'd say under normal conditions, what the car is built for and what they promise, it works perfectly fine. So my week with the Ford Puma is over, and here's my overall assessment and things I've picked up along the way. First of all, I have a quick correction. In the first video, I said the Ford Puma doesn't have a frunk, but it actually does. It's 43 litres and is under a lid in the engine bay, which is why I missed it, because the lid looks like those covers typically found in modern engine bays to make everything look clean and simple. But on the Puma, you can open the lid and there's a frunk. So a plus for Ford on that front. But I've also discovered some things that have been a bit annoying. When lane assist loses the lane, it sometimes takes a bit too long to find it again, I think. And even though adaptive cruise control works down to 0 kilometers per hour, it disengages after about a second of being stopped. This means if you're in a traffic jam and stop for more than a second, you have to manually start the car moving again. Most cars only disengage after 4 or 5 seconds, so I don't know why the Puma does it so quickly. It's almost as poor as the MG S5, which disengages adaptive cruise control as soon as you hit 0 kilometers per hour. I also find it a bit annoying that I can't set the cruise control to the current speed limit when I activate it, but instead have to either do it manually or wait for the car to see a sign and figure it out itself. Fortunately, the Ford Puma is quite good at identifying signs and also adjusting the speed in advance when you're already driving with adaptive cruise control active, so it's not a huge problem. But you can actually do that in other cars. And then I think they could have put a touch sensor in the steering wheel. When Renault can, for example, in the Renault 5, then Ford should also be able to afford it. And if not, they could include it in the assistance package, which you have to pay extra for anyway. Yeah, I'm not a fan of that either. So my overall impression of the Ford Puma is a bit mixed. It's really good to drive and has impressively good space for luggage compared to its size. The assistants are generally good too, even if they're not quite on par with the best systems, and even though the software might be a bit slow, it works fine and does everything it should. But I'd still like to be able to decide for myself which charging providers I want to use, rather than having to run everything through Ford to make it easy. I've looked a bit at their Electroverse solution, and fortunately, it seems that the prices aren't much higher than directly from the individual providers. So if you want to give up a little control and probably also a little price, then it's at least super easy to use. So in that way, the Puma actually lives up to Ford's promises of easy operation and charging. But if you have a subscription with a specific provider, such as Clever, well, then the solution just isn't very useful. The voice assistant also works fine, and even though it's not quite on par with what Google Assistant can deliver, it works well when you know how to talk to it. So the car can actually do everything it's supposed to. There are just those various points of irritation that drag it down a bit for me. It might not matter as much to you, and on the whole, the Ford Puma is a fine electric car, though it doesn't quite get the tech nerd here all excited. But that was basically it. If you're up for more videos about electric cars and tech, there's a new one for you right there. And if you'd like to support my channel directly, I can always use a cup of coffee. See you soon.